Hello everyone. Today we're going to be taking a look at a case study of science denial or climate denial. We're going to be relating it to the book of Woodbridge and Hedgley, which is a literary examination of science denial. And we're going to debunk a few claims that the denialist has offered us. I recently published a story to my Facebook page. It's from Think Progress, and it's a story about Mike Pence shilling for the tobacco industry for a fairly low amount of money. And the Mike Pence quote says, "Time for a quick reality check. Despite the hysteria from the political class and the media, smoking doesn't kill." Our case shows up with a desire to defend Mike Pence on his political corruption by minimizing the dollar amount that the tobacco industry gave him in 2000 and by comparing it to a much larger amount Bill Clinton got in some other scheme. "Oh Lord," he says, "the smoking gun, $1,500 in 2000, that despicable cure. For my part, the low dollar amount makes the situation even worse." Mike Pence isn't an unintelligent person. He's well aware of the huge financial toll the tobacco industry imposes on American society via their products. But there he is, publicly denying the science behind smoking-related illnesses. So I go on to say, the point is these people are science deniers for bribes, irregardless of the size of such. The think tanks and politicians in Washington that say smoking is not a health issue are the self-same ones that also say climate change is not a problem, acid rain is not a problem, coal fire pollution is not a problem, ozone, etc., etc. They take money from these industries which don't want to be regulated and then publish propaganda attacking the science that happens to weigh against these products as a strategy to avoid regulation. This has all been documented by Naomi Oreskes, who is a science historian and a professor of science history at Harvard. And she's written a book about such called Merchants of Doubt: How a Handful of Scientists Obscured the Truth on Issues from Tobacco Smoke to Global Warming. So we have places like the Heartland Institute, the George C. Marshall Institute, the Cato Institute, all partnering with PR firms and scientists that share their ideological lean in order to author polished talking points, junk science, and further disperse money from the tobacco, oil, and coal companies onto particular media outlets and parts of the blogosphere. At any rate, circling back around to the exchange, I go on to list some of the dollar amounts associated with the use of tobacco and the use of coal-fired electricity. So the amount of money each household in West Virginia pays to or towards healthcare associated with tobacco-related illnesses is $500 per household, which, if we invested that in a major index fund, the SPY, and let the dividends reinvest automatically, like through a Charles Schwab account, and did that over a 45-year period at around 7%, that would result in each and every household in West Virginia having an extra $200,000 at retirement, assuming they started planning for retirement at age 20 and retired at age 65. Now, if the market returned what it did back in the 20th century, then we'd be looking at a 10% return, and that would equate to about $560,000 of retirement money at 65 for each and every West Virginia household if instead of paying for smoking-related illnesses, we had that money to put into retirement. This is the true long-term cost of, quote, the freedom to smoke, unquote, though I would argue that having $500,000 in retirement extra for every household in West Virginia would be a greater degree of freedom than being allowed to smoke cigarettes. Moving along to the second dollar amount I quoted in my response is that from the full cost of accounting for the life cycle of coal study by the Harvard Medical School, published in the Annals of the New York Academy of Sciences. And we can just fast forward here to the conclusion, which states the yearly and cumulative costs stemming from the aerosolized solid and water pollutants associated with the mining, processing, transport, and combustion of coal affect individuals, families, communities, ecological integrity, and the global climate. The economic implications go far beyond the price we pay for electricity. Our comprehensive review finds that the best estimate for the total economically quantifiable costs based on a conservative weighing of many of the study findings amount to some $345.3 billion, adding close to 17.8 cents per kilowatt hour of electricity generated from coal. The low estimate is $175 billion, or over 9 cents per kilowatt hour, while the true monetizable costs could be as much as the upper bounds of $523.3 billion, adding close to 26.89 cents per kilowatt. These and the more difficult to quantify externalities are borne by the general public. And what one must keep in mind is that the cost of electricity in the US is around 8 to 12 cents per kilowatt hour. And if the world operated in one of these economics 101 on paper free market fantasies, where these externalities could be litigated fairly, such resulting in their incorporation into the end user price for products, then the tobacco industry would no longer exist, and coal would have been replaced by much, much cheaper renewables by this point. The cost of solar in the southern states being about 5 cents per kilowatt hour, and the cost of wind being about 4 to 8 cents per kilowatt hour. The irony here being that our denialist thinks they are truly sticking up for free enterprise. I'm not sure how well this next slide is showing up on the video, but incidentally, it is a comparison at tradingeconomics.com of the European Union versus the US regarding GDP growth, and you can see that high marginal tax rates and significantly lower energy use secondary to efficiency does not hamper GDP growth. Indeed, the European Union has held constant with the US for decades, even pulling ahead in recent years. Back to the exchange our denialist puts forth. Let's just take one for now. I've been looking for where the negative hypothesis for climate change was disproven. Can you help me out? This demonstrates a fundamental lack of understanding of the scientific method, and we must draw a distinction here. Rigorous falsification is part of the scientific method, but that's not what our denialist is implying. The theory in question is the greenhouse gas radiative forcing theory. It has already withstood rigorous falsification. It has an overwhelming preponderance of evidence for it, both empirically and in the realm of theoretical physics, but the denialists are in denial that this rigorous falsification process has already taken place. They offer in perpetuity concerns that have already been addressed in the scientific literature and expect the scientists or advocates to hold their hands like they are children and put the answers to their concerns directly up to their noses, lest they shout, "See, gotcha!" Indeed, they have little interest in the concerns they put forward or the answers. Their exercise is one of obstruction and confounding those they see as political rivals. So when our denialist says, "I've been looking for where the negative hypothesis for climate change was disproven," that's the self-same thing as saying, "You have to prove to me that 1 multiplied by 5 is not 27 in order for me to accept the basic tenets of mathematics." If one actually goes through the process of showing why 1 times 5 is not 27, the denialist will then say, "Well, now you have to prove to me that 10 times 12 is not 37. Or again, I will not accept multiplication, addition, subtraction, etc. Now you have to disprove to me that 100 minus 5 is not 5. Or else I will not accept mathematics." Because of the infinite nature of trying to disprove every negative concern with regard to the practice of multiplication, one can see why a denier will never accept the practice. And here I'd like to read a passage from of Woodbridge and Hedgley towards the end of the book on page 257, where it is discovered that even though the antagonists' propaganda has been debunked and their motivations illuminated, that these pieces of propaganda continue to perpetuate throughout the lower classes in the villages. The book says, "On and on it did go. The ill-found nuggets of deception that Mr. Prinsep had long ago formulated were presented, and for every quarter minute it would take to recite one, it would take a quarter of an hour to push back on it with equal force. Counter-arguments then followed, questioning everything that was not commonly understood or known in the plebeian ranks, all of which too took an unproportional amount of time to dispel. Credible men unjustly suffered being stripped of their credibility, which had to be slowly rebuilt at the table. And when all possible avenues had been exhausted in exploding one particular subject, another was jumped upon in which the antagonist felt it was fair game to continue to use his formerly destroyed ideas as support of such. It was a war of attrition where patience was the commodity being targeted. The format of the debate, where a man may say anything he wished without the necessity of a reference to weight him down, also favored the men who sought not the truth, but instead only to win the argument. Indeed, they took the greatest pleasure in a cheering onlooker or passerby calling out to them that they were doing the Lord's work. So the point here is that it doesn't take much to deny something. You can deny something with one sentence, but it takes a incredibly large amount of information to address such denial. Now, I already know this from years of talking to climate denialists, and so I preface my reply to our denialist by saying, okay, I'll do one more reply, but I'm busy with other things. My carpal tunnel is screaming, and now this is starting to veer away from my main topic, so I'm not committing to a long conversation where I waste time publishing the basic tenets of the standard greenhouse gas theory, and you feign ignorance with a series of what about questions motivated from your political ideology. Okay? let's get started. And there's some irony here because as soon as I did publish my long reply to his question, he immediately did start asking a series of what about questions motivated by his political ideology. But I go on to humor him with a reply saying, the main negative hypothesis, again that wording's kind of funny, against the standard theory that has been disproved is that of recent solar irradiance contribution to planetary warming. Climate scientists already ruled it out decades ago when going through the rigorous falsification process in trying to understand recent warming, but the denialists have made it a talking point because it's something easily latched onto by scientifically illiterate people, i.e. a large subset of Americans. So how do you disprove that the sun is not contributing to recent warming? You look at the sun's recent output to see whether or not the amount of energy being delivered to the Earth system by the sun is increasing, and if it is, if the accounting makes sense. This is done by examining University of Colorado's lab for atmospheric and space physics, TSI composites. They publish in peer-reviewed journals and on their source webpage. Examining the TSI, you'll see over the last several solar cycles, solar irradiance has been flat and not increasing. Therefore, recent warming cannot be explained by the hypothesis that TSI is increasing because it is not. Negative hypothesis destroyed. This is further reinforced by Foster and Rahmstorf 2011, who subtracted out the solar TSI, the cooling effects of volcanoes, and the Pacific and Atlantic Ocean heat flow oscillations from the temperature time series, and what was left was the ever-increasing greenhouse gas signal. In other words, subtracting out the sun's effect on the temperature time series does not stop the global temperature from rising. And I go ahead and publish a few links to the University of Colorado webpage and to the Foster and Rahmstorf Global Temperature Evolution 1979 to 2010 paper. I go on to address one of the denial community's counter-arguments, which is based upon Willie Soon's TSI model, which he reverse engineered to create the perception that TSI was continuing to rise throughout the last part of the 20th century, which it is not. I'm going to try to conclude this video around 20 minutes and then address some of our denialist claims in a part 2 video. But I'd like to preface such with a few more readings of Woodbridge and Hedgley, which will be relevant to understanding the mechanics of the denialists' offerings. First, let's address the concept of fake experts. At the head of episode 4 of Woodbridge and Hedgley, we have the introduction to our fake expert and propagandist, which goes as follows. Mr. Prinsep was something of a fading gray dandy, haggard but well-shaved, and missing a hand's area of hair his junior self did once possess atop his forehead. More importantly to his company, though, was that he was a natural philosopher and fellow of the Royal Society of London, the title everything to their wants. And it was neither here nor there that he was a most unproductive member, having contributed no articles to the philosophical transactions along his tenure. So a fake expert is just that, someone that has some sort of credentials, but is not a productive contributor to the body of science they claim to be an expert in, either through incompetence or an actual lack of expertise in the field in question. Now let's fast forward to page 170 of Woodbridge and Hedgley and listen to what our fake expert has to say about the mechanics of propaganda. He says, "Whilst I know not of any one piece of philosophical information that can comprehensively break their entire lot, we must, however, constantly strive to create the perception that such can be done or has already been done. Indeed, in a contradistinguishing fashion to one sole all-smiting stroke, we, to the greatest effect, thus work in the realm of gratuitous rhetoric, the like to a London barrister weaving a case by multiple strands, the greater of these appearing to an audience not necessarily on any logical ground, but in a manner rhetorical, political, emotive, or otherwise. To be sure, we will have our moments for a given strand. We may find a careless error in our adversary's argument and work to turn such into a very great thing indeed. But the better part must be attractive enough, even in cases of broken reason, that it remains effective. In fact, it's probably most efficacious not to subject any strand to the focus on first principles or evidence. By this style of argument, several strands may buckle or break, but if the majority stay intact, then we give ourselves the finest cause to be the victors. And for every strand our adversary produces, we need only continuously produce two against it to legitimize our stand against him. And our propagandist goes on page 171 to say, for the material that is relevant to your particular country town, sirs, sharp wit is not our instrument, rather the opposite. We must solicit the admiration of dollards that hold the way of the world not in long drawn-out passages, but in quick bites of truths that are easily clapped onto, casual observances that work more times than not, even if but near half of those, yet which they will grasp onto most angrily on all occasion as a function of they being so readily understood, and by their holder's frailty of mind in the presence of the unfamiliar, or that which is troublesome to smoke. So keep these ideas in mind in part 2 as we start to address the denialists' gish gallop of propaganda.